Hello, it's Michele from Dasami Publishing, welcoming you to another episode of Dasami Bookworm Podcast. And I am delighted to say that today's guest that we'll be chatting with is Ian Mack from Ian Mack's podcast. Welcome, Ian.
Long time no see, long time no speak. How's things?
It's wonderful.
Good.
And the reason for today's podcast is that we wanted to talk about podcasting, which we both love to do. And I thought that might give some inspiration to those of you who have been thinking about doing it, not too sure and wondering where we go with it. So Ian Mack started his podcast long before I did, and he inspired me to start the one for Dasami Bookworm. So Ian, please tell me what inspired you to start your podcast.
Honestly, I haven't a clue. But I just thought, why not do something different? It was at the start of lockdown. I remember that. And I thought, I'm going to try and do a podcast. Which I did do, put it out there and started getting listeners. I was talking about everyday things. Like, if I said to you right now, what do you think of the big British menu or Great British menu or something like that? I would talk about that, right? So that then happened, and then, as we know, lockdown seriously kicked in. My grandson, who plays football and also plays rugby, obviously with two different teams, that all came crashing down round about his ears. The kids couldn't get out there to play, etc., and he was not a happy boy. So we went for a walk one day, and I had been thinking about doing a podcast with him at the start of the next football season, which would have been July, August. And we're wandering about the streets, chatting about this and that. And I said, how do you fancy doing a podcast with me? So that was fine. He always calls me Grumps. I strongly object to it because I'm not grumpy, as you know.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry. I can actually attest to the fact that I think Grumps kind of suits, despite the fact you do smile sometimes. But yeah, so actually Grumps suits.
So we had a name before we even get back to
and what's it,
his
Grumps?
House, and it's Grumps and the Lad Chat Sports. And we kicked that off, and I'll stick my hands up, I'll be dead honest with you, the first two or three were scripted to give him a wee lead, and it sounded scripted, and it just didn't come across well. Then what happened was I said to him, right, what do you know about football? What do you know about rugby? What do you know about F1? And he just sat there like Wikipedia, firing everything at me. And I was totally lost. And I thought, this actually sounds a lot more natural. So we completed last Monday, we completed episode 106. We have had over 2,000 listeners. What we cover, and I'm really pleased and proud to say this, we also cover Scottish women's football, and we also cover English women's football. We cover the Scottish national women's team, and we cover the English national women's team. And we also chat about other women's football around the world.
So when you first started, it was just about, the local teams. And how did it expand? How did it get into the women's football? How did that progress for you?
Initially it was Scottish Premier League, English Premier League. Then I took advice from our mutual friend Russell, who's a big at listening to podcasts, and what I said to him was, what is your ideal listening time? Now, for anybody who's wanting to get into podcasting, don't sit there for an hour gibbering about something, because you'll lose folk after 15, 20 minutes. So the maximum that we have run, depending on what's happened in the sports world that week, is 30 minutes. Right, that is, we have a limit. I'm not saying we get everything into that 30 minutes, depending if there's Scottish football on, English football's on, the Champions League's on, the Europa League's on, and then we'll maybe do a wee roundup with F1 tennis, likes of this week, the big talking point was Djokovic beating Steffi Graf's record of being at number one for 378 weeks, which not everybody knows about. Steffi had 377, which, stating the absolute obvious, Djokovic equalled last week. He's still number one this week. 378 weeks at number one, which is absolutely phenomenal.
I would say I'm impressed, but as all of our listeners know, Federer is my favorite tennis player, and he's retired. So I will listen to the others, and I will probably watch Wimbledon. However, please go ahead with the other stats, which is great because it went beyond football.
So then we expanded from the United Kingdom into Europe, and we started looking at the French league, the German league, and all other leagues around Europe. We've had a bit of a laugh and a carry on, and we've included Russell in this because he's been loyal and true since almost day one that we do the Fantasy Football League, and I'm sad to say Russell's actually top of that. Albeit he's not part of our set-up this season, but I do know how many points he's got unless he's telling me porcupines. F1 season will be starting up soon, so last weekend we looked at the trial runs which took place in Saudi prior to the Grand Prix season starting there. The wee man's big on his UFC, so he just sits and talks about that. I haven't a goddamn Scooby what he's on about, but he just tells me this guy's fighting this guy and this is who. And obviously the first love in his life is Glasgow Warriors and the Scottish national team, so I just let him go for it. And if you listen to the first couple of episodes and listen to episode 106, it's absolute night and day with him, and it's been a real pleasure doing it with him. There's never any pressure, we just sit and we chat, and the minute that 30 minutes or less comes up, then we just pull the plug on it. So, if you were going into podcasting, right, I would suggest a maximum 30 minutes. Make it interesting. Find out what people like. Speak to people who listen to podcasts, who are interested. We're not famous. We're not like half these people that are putting podcasts out just now who have all got names and they'll get TV programmes and all the rest of it. And you've just really got to build up your audience. And I can't remember if I said that a couple of minutes ago, but we've had over 2,000 listeners, and that does not include the Ian Mac podcast. Find yourself. I'll stick my hands up. I use Spreaker, which you can either do for free. You get X amount of hours free, and then you have to start deleting previous podcasts. I actually pay an annual subscription, so I think we get a load of hours, right, as far as that's concerned. So let's say I got 100 hours, that's 200 episodes I can put out before I have to start looking at what am I going to have to do here
before it starts costing you extra money. And that's the thing, is that when someone wants to start a podcast, it's often it seems quite intimidating because they think they have to be professional. They think everything has to go along streamlined and scripted. And I think the point that you brought up, Ian, that's really important is that when it was first scripted, it felt unnatural. And that when you actually do it and just talk about things, the excitement comes out when you're talking, when you and your grandson are talking about what's going on in the league or in rugby or whatever it might be. It's the excitement of being knowing about the game.
Yeah, there's that as well. And if you do start getting loads of listeners, then you can monetize it. Which you can do.
And that's the thing, is that it's about building listeners, and it's about creating something that people are interested in, which is the most important part of it. And the reason that you do it, as it started from COVID, it was something to keep an interest in what's going on at the time, and to keep people, because I think a lot of us during COVID had to create interests outside of where we were before. And I think it's wonderful that the creativity that you did with it, with the idea of a podcast, especially one with, now, as our listeners know, Ian Mac podcast, I was a guest on yours for a long time, which we'll get around to Dasami in a minute.
Yeah.
But the point is that you've had two. So one has been more targeted towards business, and then one towards Grumps and the Lad with, the interest in sports. So it also shows the diversity that if someone wants to start something, they don't have to limit themselves to one subject.
You don't. And when I came to you, when Jasami was up and running and everything, I said, why don't you do a podcast? You were very much, well, I don't know if I can do that. I went, no, you can. If you don't try, then you're never going to know. And okay.
And then all you had to do was say, I have to talk, and then that kind of sold me on it, because as everyone knows, I do love to talk.
Yeah, I mean, I would limit mine to 30 minutes and you could limit yours to 30 hours. But having said that, you have done some phenomenal podcasts. Honest to God, I've listened to them all, as you know. Okay, give the secret away. It's me that puts the music in at the start and me that puts the music in at the end.
Of course.
But having said that, the ones with Judith at Panopticon absolutely fascinated me. I was born and bred in Glasgow. I must have walked by that building at least 1,000 times. But Judith has brought the whole place to life. And I'm not saying that your students or your interns who you've interviewed from various parts of the world were any less interesting. I think the one about education in Germany and
with Judith and Leah. Judith from France, Julia from France, Leah from Germany, Isadora, who's here, but with the Brazilian aspect to it. Yes,
they were absolutely fascinating, and it gives you a whole insight into how other education system works. And the fact that was it Leah was a German
from Germany, yes.
You have to pick your subjects at the age of 12 or 13 and decide what you're going to grow up to be. Who knows what they want to be at 12 and 13?
Exactly.
That's the way the German system works.
Exactly.
And guides them in that direction.
Yes.
What if she turned around and says, I want to be a bin man? What would you have done with that?
Or a doctor at 18.
Aye.
Yes.
So they guide them in that direction. And it was actually quite fascinating. So you've done some absolute humdingers.
Thank you.
Have you enjoyed it?
I do have to say, Ian, that I really do enjoy the podcasts, and I've tried to create a variety of them, as you do the variety with yours, but a variety that makes it interesting to, the audience and our listeners, so that it's not the same thing every week. So that it's not just about promoting Jasami, but it's about promoting the interest of literacy with children, about working with authors, working with interns, working with anyone who might be within the book industry, but also out with that. And as a little foreshadowing, we've got a couple of really interesting ones coming up in the next month or so. But that is true. It's not just about promoting us. It's about promoting other interests. We did a recent one with Elaine Knox-Watson at Sterling University. And that had to do with the program, the module she works with about finding experience. And a lot of people don't know that, is that if you're going to Sterling University, you've got that opportunity for someone to assist you to find work experience with it. Not all of the universities offer that, some of them, and we've been very fortunate. We have an excellent working relationship with Napier, with Glasgow University, Edinburgh University, Strathclyde. So we are very fortunate in finding them. We're also very fortunate with the international students that we've had. I do have to put a caveat on that, not to bring politics into it, but due to Brexit, we now can no longer offer internships to any international students. because of the Brexit, Erasmus is not bringing them into Scotland. So although we had Leah from Germany and we had Julie from France, and we were offering other ones, and we had 2 other interns who unfortunately had to withdraw because they weren't able to do that. But we won't go into the political discussion of Brexit. What we will say is that we still have lots of opportunities for those students and potential interns who come to us within Scotland, England, Northern Ireland, in Wales. We do love that because we love the diversity that it brings to the company. And we like to promote that. They have varied interests. It also gets them out into the world and to express what they feel about the job they do, the interests they have, looking towards their future. And I think that's really good with your Grumps and the Lad. I do love that name. But it grew. It started with one little part of the football, and then it grew into, even I think the Formula One was in there, or one of the racing.
We covered the whole Formula One season.
Excellent. So it starts, and that's, I think, an inspiration to anyone who wants to start a podcast, is that you start with one little part that interests you, but it will naturally grow arms and legs, as you want to say, that it will expand upon itself. Because when you start thinking about what do I want to do for a podcast, because that was what, when you first suggested it, intimidated me. I didn't want to do it and say, people will think we just want to promote Dasami, which obviously we do, but my interest also lies with our commitment to community. We've interviewed Zoe from Arcbound, which is the charity we work with, where we do a mentorship. I mentor, young authors who don't have the opportunity to get that mentorship and that knowledge anywhere else. We've also done the charity where we gave them money to Macmillan, and they're going to get a sizable one from Chef Ruth's Cookbooks. Also Columbia with Shirley Ryan. The money that she's raised has gone to the animal rescue, but also she's given the last event that she did went to the local cancer hospital.
Okay.
So we continue to work with charities. So it's not just about us producing books, but it's also about the work that we can do out there, as a small indie company. So what was your first biggest challenge and the part that you loved the most? So what's your biggest challenge, Ian?
That's a humdinger of a question. I think the biggest challenge is trying to keep up with the lad, to be dead honest with you, because he's just a sponge, and it doesn't matter what you ask him, or past, present and future, he's got an answer for absolutely everything, because he sits and studies these things and it all just seems to go in. I mean, he's asking me about Pele, he's asking me about Johan Cruyff. He shouldn't even know anything about these folk at his age, but it's just a subject he's interested in. And I've had folk saying to me, and this is what you've really got to watch when you're doing a podcast, I'm not really interested in F1. Okay, that's fine. Just listen to the football part then. Just listen to the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Or I'm not interested in golf, or I'm not interested. I think the biggest challenge is keeping everybody happy. Because one guy that I know, he went, you never mentioned MotoGP. Talking double Dutch to me. So I had to go and look it up and study it, and we went through the MotoGP season. And some folk weren't exactly keen on that. But you're not going to keep everybody happy all the time. You know what I mean?
That's very, very true.
It is a sports chat. Now, if you're doing a podcast, right, I've already said I use Spreaker, and then when I upload it to Spreaker, see your hashtags, right? So the likes of my hashtags is Scotland, Scottish, England, English, Premier League, women football, and then hashtag F1, hashtag UFC, all the hashtags and everything you can actually think about, right? And then I've had feedback from Spreaker. I've had folk in Brazil listening to it. I've had folk in Canada listening to it. I don't know anybody in Brazil. I know a few folk in Canada, but they don't know that we're doing, the last European Championships for the women, I was battering in every team that was in that European Championship, and I was maybe getting one listener here and one listener there, all because of these hashtags. So again, that's another thing. If you're going to go into podcasting, don't be afraid of it.
That's the important part. And as everyone knows, I love to do them live as much as I can. So we have, when we did it at the Edinburgh International Book Festival, we had all kinds of background noises. We were off premises as we were supposed to be. But there were the background noises, but you feel the ambiance is there. And we've done we did a couple on Spotify Live, which we will do again. Because then we've got, listener interaction, which is really important. One thing I have to say is that I know we add it in our descriptions, and our program producer, Ailey Beaton, works so hard to find all of the interesting subjects, and she found Judith at the Panopticon for us, is that we have our, info at Jasami Publishing Limited .com. The email is on there so that people can email us with subjects that they'd like us to chat about, questions they may have, and even about this podcast, about starting a new podcast for themselves. To know that, yes, we are a professional organization when it comes to publishing books. However, we were new when it came to podcasting, and you're new at something at any point in time. I would consider you as, a professional in podcasting now because of the episodes you have behind you and the listeners that still follow you, and which I think is really important.
I would say, if you're going to do a podcast, do it on a subject you know about. You were new to podcasting, but you weren't new to publishing. So you went in there with all that knowledge and experience behind you. You get into podcasting and you start going on about something you know nothing about, folk will suss you out in 5 minutes.
True, very true. They know honesty, and they know the passion. You have a passion for the sports when it comes to, football and rugby and all the sporty things. So that's very true, and thank you for saying that, as I have a passion for publishing and writing and creating. So when you have a passion for it, I think that is the key piece of advice. My next question was, the key piece of advice that you would offer to someone for starting the podcast, which I think you've just done it.
Know what you're talking about.
Know what you're talking about. So what is to get to the second part of my question, what's the most fun part of podcasting for you?
Spending time with the wee man, to be honest with you. And it's something he can look back on in years to come.
And listen to.
In
years to come.
Because it's always there.
Yes.
It's always good. Well,
it's like everything.
It's like everything else. You just don't know what road we're going down.
Nowadays, that once it's out there, it's always going to be out there. And I think that's what's really key. I have to say, what I really love about podcasting is the interesting people that I'm meeting. When Ailey approaches someone, and we've got a couple of really interesting podcasts coming up, as I said earlier, but Ailey reaches out and finds different subjects and people to talk to, and that's what we want to do. So as I said earlier in the description, info at JasamiPublishingLimited.com, email us with ideas of, yes, I'd like to hear about this, and if it's possible, we'll do it. There's very few things that we wouldn't go into, which I can't think of it now, but if you come to it, we will definitely consider it, and if we can, we'll do it. if it came to interviewing one of the royal family members, I don't know that we might be able to do that. However, we might try. What would you like to do in a podcast in the future that you haven't done yet, Ian?
I suppose interview someone that's well known, but I'd want to keep it light-hearted. Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's what you do. You do light-hearted, so it would be that in the podcast anyway.
So, I mean, if I ran into Rod Stewart, I'd probably ask him, do you fancy doing a podcast?
Yeah, that might work. Oh, I wonder if I ran into Roger Federer. I know it's not. I know it's sport, but
that'll be about 25 parts.
Yeah, I know it's sport and it's not actually in the publishing, but I might make that an exception. I promise I won't go into your territory. I'd refer him to you.
There's plenty in my territory already.
I wouldn't refer him to you. So I think we've given some really good advice out there about podcasting. I think the key part is that you and I share is that we both enjoy what we do in our podcasts.
Get them out regularly. I mean, you're infamous for your Friday mornings.
Yes.
Whereas for Grumps and the Lad, if there's a big weekend coming up, where it's maybe Scottish Cup, English FA Cup, the big weekend in the Women's Super League down south, where there's going to be top of the table clash, I'll move it from a Friday to a Monday. So we were going out regular on a Friday morning, but I felt we were missing out on what was happening on Saturday and Sunday, and it was a whole other week before we get round to that again.
See, so you kept it current, which I think is a great idea. Continuity is very important, but keeping it current is even more important. And assessing that and considering that also, that makes it important. You considered what was important to your listeners, that they wouldn't want to know information that was a week old. So I admire that.
Which is no good to anybody. So on a Monday, we can cover what happened Saturday, what happened Sunday, Champions League on a Tuesday, Champions League on a Wednesday, Europa League on a Thursday, and the weekend games coming up, and what the wee man's predictions are. And I'll tell you, the sooner he starts putting a coupon on, the better, you know. And what you don't want basically is Russell as one of your listeners, because there's nothing more certain you're going to get a text message saying, oh, by the way, we won the cup 54 times, not 53. Yeah, okay, Russell.
Is actually, I don't think Wikipedia could keep up with him. He is an encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to football sports.
Yeah.
So yes, we have to do that. So I think in wrapping up this conversation, the last number one tip, which I think you've already said, but let's reinforce it. Number one tip to someone who wants to start a podcast.
Know what you're talking about.
I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. And I think my number one tip is also knowing it, but enjoying it. Be passionate about it, because the listeners will know when you really love it and enjoy it. They'll hear it in your voice. And as everyone knows, I'm passionate about what we do here. So as I do all of the time, we have to do a shout out. Your shout out first. Who will you do your shout out to, Ian?
To the lad and everything he's put into it to make it the success it has been over the last 2 years.
Excellent. So not to give you too big a head, but I will do my shout out to Ian Mack Podcast, for producing ours. Well, I say taking care of the technical part. Ailey is the program producer. So I will do the shout out to you. Thank you for taking care of that for us.
You're welcome.
And to say, listen to Grumps and the Lad for all the sports talk. And thank you. Again, if you have any questions about podcasting for, as newbies, newers, whatever you want to do for ideas for it, don't hesitate. If you've got an idea for what you want to hear from us, we've already listed it and it's in the description. So this is Michele from Jasami Bookworm Podcast. We've done it from the Jasami offices here. And as always, I wish you a sunny day.